And a short time ago, I was joined from Sacramento by technology writer Jeffrey Young. He's authored 2 books on Apple and Steve Jobs. Mr. Young, do you think that Apple can be as successful in the post-Steve Jobs era as it has been in the past decade or so?
I don't think so. I think that you're going to see a change in Apple. Much of Apple's success is because of an emotional reaction that many people have with Steve and with his products. He's really a remarkable human being and somebody who transcends the technology space. And because of that, people feel a real connection to Apple that I think is going to dissipate with time. Also, Apple's going to be very hard-pressed to produce the kind of products and the excitement that they have under Steve. Steve is a unique guy. He's a perfectionist and a driven perfectionist who really has a confidence in his own talent that no one else could have. He's had 30 years at the pinnacle of the technology industry. He's changed many industries, and that is just unheard of anywhere else. And so I just don't think you can replace that in any kind of short-term sense. I think Apple's big problems are going to be in the sort of midterm, the next 5 years. I think Apple right now has a very good product line. It's going to do very well. Steve set them up very well. And, but going forward, they're going to have a hard time replicating that, continuing to succeed like that.
Should we read anything into the fact that when Apple unveiled the new iPhone 4S this week, that the market was a bit underwhelmed and that the share price was down about 5% at one point?
Yes, I think you're seeing the kind of effect that Steve's extraordinary success has had on Apple. Apple, in other words, the expectations for Apple are that it'll always top itself with another extraordinary product. That's a very tough act to follow. You can't keep topping yourself with products like that. You know, this is an incremental product. Apple will continue to retain those and put those products out, but it's just not exciting to the market. And so much of their stock is built on hype and excitement and thrill and irrational investing that I think that it's going to be very, very hard for them going forward.
Tell us about your personal experiences with Steve Jobs, including the first time that you met him.
Well, it was a fascinating meeting. It fits everything that all the stories you've ever heard of Steve, of driven insanity. I was walking through the Bandley building at the Apple headquarters in Cupertino. We'd started a magazine. This was before the Macintosh came out. We'd started a magazine that was going to be about the Macintosh. I was a newspaper reporter in the area and had joined the team as one of the founding editors. And Steve caught sight of me inside the Bandley area where I'd been given a permission to enter. This is a secret project. He stopped in his tracks. He was talking to a couple of other people, stopped in his tracks, put his face in my face and yelled at me, "Who the hell are you?" And I told him who I was, and he then proceeded to grill me about what my bona fides were. What I'd written, where I'd published, who I was, what I was intending to write. And after about 3 or so minutes of intense questioning, he lost interest in me completely. Never really engaged with me again, even though for 6 months I spent hours and days inside the Apple headquarters building where the Mac was being developed. And I was able to just sort of join the meetings and be part of the whole team, but he never really paid me any more attention because he'd gotten what he wanted, which he'd found out who I was, and from then on I wasn't moving the Macintosh forward. I was an outsider, a hanger-on, a journalist, a writer, a reporter, but I wasn't a member of his all-hallowed Macintosh team.
So with the sort of style that you describe him as having, how did he engender so much loyalty from his staff and from fans of the company?
Well, because, you see, Steve is a perfectionist, but he's also a perfectionist with taste. And so because he's a perfectionist with taste, he can drive people who have great talent to do things beyond what they might be able to do otherwise. And that's what he does, is he inspires you to show him up. One of Steve's favorite phrases is brain dead. And he would say that about you no matter almost what you were doing. If he thought something was stupid, he'd tell you it was brain dead. And he said this over and over and became his sort of pet phrase. It was, he would tell everybody this, that he hated, that he just, you were brain dead. That was a brain dead idea. It was a brain dead decision. It was a brain dead design. And that intensity that pursued you all the time either drove you to do greater and greater stuff, i.e. go way beyond anything you could ever do before, or it drove you to leave because you couldn't stand it. He had an extraordinary design ability, had a knowledge of electronics deeper than anyone usually remembers. Steve, you got to remember, grew up in the Silicon Valley culture. worked in surplus electronics parts stores as a teenager. He knew what parts to buy. He knew the price of every part in the Apple I and Apple II. And he was famous in Silicon Valley for telling people to sharpen their pencils, to get a better deal, to shave a penny, a tenth of a cent off a component. People don't remember that part of Steve, but Steve was an extraordinarily good manufacturing guy, an operations guy. He could make computers really cheaply. That's a very important skill, something that Apple has always done well with. They've always had very high margins, even though their products are highly priced, but their margins have always been good because their cost of goods is always remarkably low.
How do you think that history is going to look at Steve Jobs? Will he be ranked alongside other great innovators like Thomas Edison and Leonardo da Vinci, for example?
Yes, I think he's going to be in the rank. I wouldn't say Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, da Vinci is a grand artist, a transcendent artist. Steve isn't that. Steve's an entrepreneur, an impresario, somebody who can see great ideas, can inspire them to be even better, and inspire the people behind those ideas to do greater work than they've ever done before. And he had the personal charisma and the power to bring those products to market. I think it's an Edison type of thing. Now, Edison, on the other hand, was an extraordinary inventor as well. So I'm not sure they're correspondent. The person that I think is the closest to Steve in the history of modern business, is Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes the difference between them was that Steve was born as an orphan and was raised by a blue-collar family in the Bay Area. His dad was a machinist. Howard Hughes' father owned a machine tool company in Texas, and Howard Hughes was born rich. He was always rich. But in the breadth of the products that Howard Hughes produced, I think he's the only person who is close to Steve. Steve has made enormous contributions to the music industry, to the computer industry, to the movie industry, and animation industries. I think you can argue that Hughes, with his helicopters and his movie innovations, had a similar breadth of influence. So, I mean, I think that's the only person I've been able to come up with, and I've spent a lot of time trying to find someone who is similar to Steve in history. And I think Howard Hughes is the closest that I can come up with.
Jeffrey Young, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. My pleasure.